What's up gamers, DreamcastGuy here, reviewing today Travis Strikes Again, No More Heroes. We are now almost 2 years into the Nintendo Switch's life cycle, and typically, when it comes to a console generation, this is when you start to see the more dangerous games coming out. The stuff that's more eccentric and not at all normal. Typically, I absolutely love this stuff, the daring games. But sometimes I will admit that these games, in their effort to try and be so different, end up downright sucking. That's part of the reason that I love Suda 51 as a director though. The guy who made this is somebody who's really talented at jumping outside the typical comfort zone and delivering something you didn't know you wanted. In this one case though, I have to say that what we have here is a little bit of a dud. I wish this game was good. I wish that it was able to live up to the standards of every other No More Heroes game. But what we got is a very repetitive, very short, and very boring little slasher. But let's begin this review by talking about the rather peculiar setting. So this time around, we are once again playing as Travis Touchdown and taking up the beam katana for justice. But the twist is that now we are not alone. The evil assassin Badman at the beginning breaks into your trailer and tries to kill you. And during the process of this, both of you are sucked into a magical game console and must now work together in order to defeat a series of bosses and escape. Now, the story itself is by far my biggest problem with it, because so much of it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Sometimes they're trying to beat these games because it'll grant wishes. Sometimes they're trying to beat them because it might save the world. There is so much about this storyline that seems like it wasn't fully finished before they released it. But honestly, a bad story can be overlooked as long as the combat is great, so let's talk about the fighting. This game is very different from the other No More Heroes games because no longer does it have motion controls, and instead it's just centered on some hack and slash action. You have the option of at any time playing as Travis or Badman, but for the most part I just played as Travis. They fight basically 99% the same other than a couple different attack patterns, but I just like Travis more because obviously he's the character I'm more familiar with. In general combat, you have a couple different ways of attacking. You have a fast attack, a strong attack, and also your special magic called chips. And really you're going to be using each of these in different times for different situations. Like, some of my magic can stun enemies, or pick them up with telekinesis and throw them against a wall, or you'll try and use fast attacks to take out the enemies that have 1 health, or a strong attack to try and break somebody's block. This game sort of dances with the idea of having deep combat, but it really doesn't matter that much. I think a big problem with this is the fact that the enemies are all so repetitive. It looks like I'm probably using all footage from the same level, but this stuff is actually from throughout the entire game. Everybody sort of looks and behaves identically, and since you end up spending about 50 minutes in a lot of these areas just fighting the same 3 dudes over and over again, you very quickly become fully experienced at how to take them out, what their weakness is. Is it somebody who dives underground? Okay, just dodge them. Oh, is it somebody who has a big shield? Alright, then just electrocute him so that the shield falls out of his hand and chop him up. It's just too easy and simultaneously a little bit annoying because it provides no real challenge. Even the people that have a lot more health aren't really fun to fight because it just means that they take 6 slashes instead of 2 slashes. It is possible if you want to play the entire game co-op though, so if you're somebody who wants to try and do this 2-player and thinks that it might be a little bit more enjoyable if you have somebody to back you up, I will say that it's a little bit cooler. It's definitely balanced as a 1-player game. I think they probably added co-op as an idea at the very last second, and the reason I say that is because co-op in some ways actually breaks the game. A lot of fights are actually glitched out. You'll see enemies not understanding how there are 2 heroes at once, or there will be times where there's a 2D area and you're actually having to jump on a bunch of bouncy donuts to get up to an upper area, but both of us cannot jump simultaneously. By yourself, these platforming sections are incredibly simple, but with 2 people, they're nearly impossible because people keep going off the screen. It doesn't really know how to center on 2 separate players at once, so somebody, no matter what, is going to be making blind jumps and repeatedly falling to their death. Now, I think that the biggest flaw of all in this game is that the levels seem like they're awesome, and each time you land in one, originally it's so freaking cool, but you get tired of it very, very quick, because once again, they just keep repeating ideas over and over again. Like in one of them, you're dropped into this world that looks like a tiny little suburban neighborhood, and every time you walk into one of the houses, you're given this little cutscene about a serial killer. It doesn't tell you why you're having to watch these cutscenes, but they just basically explain that there's this guy who keeps killing bad people, and every one of the houses you go into, you have to listen to another one of these speeches about another one of his victims. You kill a couple enemies and you're back out on the street. The first time I saw one of these, I thought it was really cool, of like, oh man, who is this serial killer? Why is this going on? How does it connect to Travis? But it doesn't. It just kind of sits there, explains some random element, you end up killing a boss, and you're back in the real world. It is a style of repetition that just grates on me so badly, to the point at which a lot of this time I actually just got bored during this review. And I feel like that's the worst thing of all, because this is a No More Heroes game. It should be spectacular. Now, on the topic of boredom, I do unfortunately have to talk about the biggest downside of all, which is that the real world, when you actually pop out of these games, is incredibly basic. So you have a tiny area out here where you can look at Travis's trailer, but when you try and get the next game to try and play it, they're called death balls, you just get on your motorcycle and it shows you a 10-minute text screen. Do you see this? This is actually a real part of the game, and it doesn't happen once as a joke. It actually happens over and over again. One of these is nearly 20 minutes long. Look at this. I'm just going to put a bunch of them side by side here. This is how they explain all of the plot. Each time he goes in here, they tell us a 10-minute story about Travis finding the next death ball. We go back there, we play that game, and then we go back on the motorcycle and find the next death ball. And that's it. It is the most rinse and repeat style of storytelling I've ever seen. And you know what's really weird about this? The game even jokes about how it's going to get bad review scores because of this. Literally, look at the words. They straight up acknowledge the fact that these are incredibly boring cutscenes, but instead of making them fun or giving us a mini game where we're actually having to fight people out in these new environments, it stays as green text on a black screen. It is so visually unappealing, it's hard to be stimulated by it. I'll fully admit that at one point I actually was trying to just get through these cutscenes, and I went out to dinner with some friends, and I just sat there at my table eating dinner while just skimming the storyline. I was so bored by this point that I didn't even really care what the next big death ball was going to be. I wanted to make sure I was getting the facts in, since obviously I need to make sure I understand what's going on, but I was so disinterested I couldn't stay motivated by what was going on. Really, the only part of this game that I think is really, really well thought out is the boss fights, because each one of them behaves by completely different rules. Some of them have multiple phases. Some are just a super giant drag racer samurai guy. Sometimes it's a multiplying serial killer. And I think that alone is very, very cool. I like that they tried to basically surprise you with every boss fight. They're still not terribly hard, and if you do it two-player, you're going to beat it in 15 seconds. But I like that you had to actually try and think about how you're going to handle it. You need to really strategize how to use your different magic and stun the enemy and make sure you don't end up getting completely decimated, because they all do fight in such a unique pattern. I like that, but it's still not enough to make this game really as good as it deserves to be. I think that it would have been better if they just managed to add more cutscenes with real characters in them, a little bit more explanation, and more routes that tied each of these death balls together. They really have no connection whatsoever, and it just kind of becomes frustrating when you jump into the fourth or fifth world and nothing really actually glues together. There's no real roots, there's no real ties, there's no real effort to care about what Travis and what Badman are actually trying to accomplish. Okay, so we've heard some good and some bad, but let's go to the ratings board and put a big number on it. I am giving Travis Strikes Again a 5 out of 10. If you are a super huge No More Heroes fan, wait for this to go on sale. It needs to be about 20 bucks. If this were half priced, I'd be a little bit more forgiving of it. But really, even though it manages to build on the lore a little bit and introduce a couple new concepts, this is not the game that fans truly deserved. Thanks so much for watching, gamers. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. Oh man, I'm really afraid you guys are going to be mad, but it's my honest opinion. Sometimes a game is just bad. This should have been spectacular. I am a huge lover of No More Heroes, but it just needs to be great. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.